All right, some things that you need to note for the remainder of the semester. One being that this will be the last week where we'll do lecture and you'll have a current event assignment. Everybody that's come to class normally all have A's in this class, and you've done all of the assignments, and any more assignments that are assigned to you wouldn't necessarily help your grade. So that because I usually give out 13 assignments throughout the whole semester, and you're able to drop three of the assignments. But everyone that has been coming to class all have A's, and I don't feel it's necessary to have you do more current event assignments and drop some grade that it doesn't really affect your grade at all. And then the second thing is you have this quiz this week, and then next week you'll have your last quiz for the semester. So next week will be quiz number 10. And again, same with that. If I was to give you all 13 quizzes, you would be able to drop three of the quizzes. But since you all have A's, there's really no sense in giving you another quiz to drop a lower grade. So just want to note that. All right, so today we're going to be discussing project management and how it's used in the business world as well as in your personal life. As far as project management, managers typically oversee a variety of operations. Some of the operations involve routine, repetitive activities, while others involve non-routine activities. Projects are those non-routine, one-time operations that managers have to oversee or have to keep tabs on. Some of the examples in the business world of projects include the Olympic Games, which, depending on whether it's summer or winter, it's happening every 4 years or 2 years, but the planning for the Olympic game starts way before the 2 or 4 years that it's about to happen. It may start the planning for certain Olympic games may start maybe 5 to 10 years ahead of that because it's so involved. So many things have to be done. You have to have so many resources available, and the people and the money that's needed to get it going. You have to plan for that. Producing a movie, that takes a long time, longer than most people think. At least the big budget movies usually take several years from start to finish. Product development, software development are other examples of different projects. As a student, in your student life, especially in this class, you get weekly projects that get assigned to you. So you might receive the assignment, and as far as planning and getting it done, you receive the assignment, you research the topic, you take your notes and everything, and then you prepare your slideshow, whether you use PowerPoint or whatever slideshow software there is available. You prepare it and you practice it and then you present it. So that's kind of like in your student life. You look at the different projects, the different individual projects and group projects that you receive, and just think through all of the steps that it takes from beginning until you actually turn that assignment in. Projects may involve a considerable cost. Some have a long time. It goes over several years before a project's complete, and it may involve a number of activities that must be planned and coordinated to complete the project. You'll have goals, you'll have different milestones, different expectations that'll be set, usually early on, but even throughout the project, you might have to set milestones and different goals to get to the next step. Task and required resources, you have to have those identified as soon as possible so that your project doesn't lag on. An example of that would be, for me, the type of work that I do for the utility company. I have to support close to 150 servers, and we're in the process of upgrading these servers to from Windows 2008. I know that seems like a long time ago, but we have to keep our servers in service for a little bit longer because we want to keep, whatever hardware and software that is up to date, that we've tested thoroughly. We have to keep it on because we can't keep, changing out servers every year because it's so many and there's so much testing that goes on. Well, I've been on this project, working on this project for close to 5 years just to upgrade from 2008 to 2012 server, Windows server. Throughout the years that I've been working on this, I've had to test different types of hardware that's going to be communicating with the software, had to install new software as well as software that we were familiar with. I had to test all of that software. And then I've had to, get in touch with have different groups and different people involved to make this happen. Security group. We have a group that monitors the health of our servers, had to get them involved. Just had to get a lot of different groups and a lot of different resources involved. And also we had to use a lot of money. This project's, it's over $2 million at least in hardware costs, software costs, as well as the labor that's involved. So it's been going on for 5 years, and we're 6 servers away from being done with this project. Started off with like 150 servers 5 years ago. We had to implement new hardware, so it was a lot of testing. So just know that when you do certain projects, in your career or even in school, it might be, it might take different different times to complete it. Some things can be completed within a week, like your weekly current event assignments, but other things might take the whole semester to complete because you have to do the research. The size, length, and scope of projects vary according to the nature and purpose of the project, but all projects have something in common. All projects usually go through some type of project life cycle, which has 4. Sometimes they have 5, where they split up execution and monitoring. But just know that you're going to be doing you're going to be going through the same life cycle. So this one has 4 phases. Phase 1 is initiating, phase 2 is planning, phase 3 is execution and monitoring and controlling, which this is the phase that normally gets split up into another one. And then the last phase is the closing phase. In the initiating phase, that begins where the process is outlined and you come up with the expected costs, the benefits and risk associated with the project. Project managers and goals are usually selected during the initiating phase. The planning phase provides detail on the deliverables, what's actually going to be done or achieved after the project is complete. The scope of the project, the budget that's available. Sometimes the budgets go over depending on the type of work that is added into the project. So, just because you set a budget and you plan for a certain budget, you might go a little bit over that budget, or you might stay within budget or be under budget. Members of the project team are also chosen in the planning stage. The next stage, the execution phase, is when the actual work of the project is carried out. Now, this sometimes takes up the majority of the time because it's, you have to come up with different types of tests. You have to test different things, and some things might not work before you put things, get things ready for the closing phase. But this is this is the phase that takes most of the time to complete. The project is managed as activities are completed again, and milestones. You reach those milestones, and you might have to set new milestones. Management involves 9 areas. So you have your project integration, your scope, human resources, who's going to be doing the work, communications. That's very key in all 4 phases. Communication. If you're not communicating out, what should be done or what's expected, and if things aren't being done the way and you're not getting the feedback, it's going to be difficult to complete a project. The time, the risk, the quality, and then cost and procurement. Those are the 9 areas that gets managed during the execution and monitoring controlling phase. The last phase is the closing phase. This ends the project. It involves handing off the project deliverables or project, what's expected. You hand that off to the customers so that they can accept it, and you also train those customers if need be, and then you document any lessons learned, any things that you learned throughout the process that can make that process a lot better. It's very important to understand that the phases may overlap, so that one phase may not be fully completed before the next phase begins. So especially in the execution phase, where you're actually putting you're working on the project, you might have to start planning again, because you may have bumped you may have run into a bump, something holding you up or some type of bottleneck. You might have to plan to get over that bottleneck. That happened plenty of times with me on the project that I'm working on now, that's taken 5 years. Project management differs from traditional management activities because of the limited time and the unique set of activities that are involved, which give way to unique problems. Much of the success of projects depend on key managerial decisions over a sequence of steps. So the steps are listed here. The first one is deciding which project to implement. This involves determining the type of criteria that will be used to decide which projects to pursue. Typical factors include things like budgets, availability of the appropriate personnel, the type of skill sets that the personnel may need or may have, and then the cost benefits have to be considered. The next step is selecting the project manager. The project manager is the central person in the project. So whenever there are questions or whenever something needs to be reported out, it's usually the project manager that's doing the reporting, or that's doing the answering, or finding the answers. The next step is selecting the project team. The project team can greatly influence how successful or how bad the project is going, or will go. The important thing to consider, some of the important things to consider when selecting the project team include, what type of knowledge base or knowledge skill set you need, and is that skill set available? How well the people on the team work together. If you have like teammates that don't get along, sometimes it's difficult to move forward in a project. The persons You need to find out what the project team members, what their other workload is, and how likely any of their other work is going to interfere with their availability for the project that you might be working on. So there's a lot of things to consider when you select the project team. The next step is planning and designing the project. which requires decisions to be made about the project's performance, the performance goals, the timetable for completing the different scopes of the project. The next step is managing and controlling project resources. Well, it's pretty much what it says. You have to manage whatever resources you have. If you're running low, or if you don't have the proper personnel with the right skill set working on your team, it's up to the project management or the project manager to make sure that you get the proper human resources. And then the last step is deciding if and when a project should be terminated. Now, sometimes it is better to terminate the project than to invest any more resources into it. You don't want to just keep putting money into something and not seeing any type of improvements. Some of the things that you might want to consider when determining whether a project should be terminated include things like the likelihood that the project is going to be successful, cost, and whether resources could be better used elsewhere. So these are some of the decisions and some of the steps that decisions are made when working on a project. The project managers have several duties. In the planning stage, they have to prepare the scope statement, which tells what the scope of the project is, what are the goals of the project, what's supposed to be delivered. They have to determine required skills that's needed to complete the project and try to identify the resources that are needed. The project manager must be capable of working through others to accomplish the objective. So it's pretty much the project manager has to delegate different tasks to people who have, the skill sets and the availability that's needed to complete a task. So it's all about the project manager, managing time, managing resources, managing money, and being able to communicate all of the goals and the milestones that's available or that's expected for a certain project. So there are several responsibilities of a project manager, and it can be summed up by using what's called the project management triangle. This triangle illustrates the three constraints of projects: your cost, which is the budget, the schedule, and then you have the scope or the performance objectives. Now, all three have an equal effect on the quality of the project. So in the middle, you have quality. You want to make sure that you're within budget and that you have the available resources and the money available to produce a quality project. You want to make sure that everybody's schedule fits or as close as possible so that it doesn't affect the quality. And then the scope, you want to make sure that there is a purpose and that purpose is stated, because otherwise you're going to have people doing different work that's not really related or have a big impact on the project as a whole. So to effectively manage the project constraints, the project manager has to employ certain skills. They have to be able to motivate people and direct the team members as well. And they also need to make trade-off decisions, like if we don't do something this week, why are we not doing this? Is it because something else is more important this week that won't allow us to do what we're supposed to do? And they have to monitor again the time that's spent and the budgets and any type of technical details. All right, so one thing that could really slow down or prevent a project from moving forward and being successful is behavioral issues within the team, amongst the team members. Behavioral metrics are just as important to a project as the project metrics are, and it should never be overlooked because people make the project happen. So if your people aren't responding well or doing what they're supposed to do, the project's pretty much not going to be very successful. The behavioral issues can interfere with the success of a project if the project manager or the people inside of the project that are working on the project don't manage them carefully. Behavioral problems can be created by decentralized decision making, stress of achieving project milestones on a time and within budget, and surprises. The team, because project work is often based on team efforts, workers are usually evaluated on the basis of the team's overall contribution. So, even though somebody might be doing well within a team, if the rest of that team isn't doing well, then the whole overall contribution of that team is going to be very low. So that statement where it says you're only as strong as your weakest link. If you're pretty strong, you have a couple of good strong team members, but you have some very bad team members, that team is only going to be as strong as whoever the worst team member is. So you want to make sure that, all of your team members are functioning and doing what they're supposed to do and they're working effectively. Some problems can be avoided by the project manager by carefully selecting the team members when possible. You don't want to have people that don't like to work with each other and can't work with each other. Engaging in active leadership, being involved in, some of the work that's being done, that makes it a lot better for the project if the project manager is also actively involved in some of the work and not just telling people what to do. Motivating employees and maintaining an environment built on trust, integrity, and professionalism. So, you want your team members to have a good sense that they can trust that each one of their team members will do what they're supposed to do and be professional about it at all times. Some organizations use project champions to help promote and support the projects. They can be very effective in facilitating the work of the project manager by talking up the projects to other managers where resources may be pulled from to work on the project. Project champions' work can be critical to the success of a project, so it's very important for team members to encourage and communicate with whoever the project champion is. So you want to have a good project champion just as well as a good project manager, and they're not always the same people. It's usually different people that you have a project manager, but you also have a project champion, and sometimes the project champion might be a little more superior than the project manager. So the project manager may be just a regular worker, and then the project champion might be that worker's supervisor, because you want to have all levels of management understanding and knowing and wanting to have this project done and being on board with it, because you might have different groups or different teams involved, and you want other teams' resources to work on it when it needs to be worked on. So if you don't have all of the groups or the teams or other management levels not on board or up to date and wanting to work through this project, the project's going to be very difficult to complete. Because large projects usually involve a very large number of activities, planners need some way to determine exactly what will need to be done so they can realistically estimate how long it will take to complete the various elements of a project and how much it will cost. They often do this by using what's called the work breakdown structure, or WBS, which is a way of listing what must be done during a project. From the figure we're looking at right here, doesn't have a figure number, but this figure here, um, the first step in developing the work breakdown structure is to identify the major elements of a project, which the level 1 is whatever the project is. Level 2 is that level where you start breaking down, the major elements of the project. So that's what this level 2 is, this level 2 area. The next step, which is level 3, or the next level, is to identify the major supporting activities for each of the major elements. So level 3 gets broken down from level 2. So it's a little bit more detail as you go to each level. As you go from level 2 to level 3, you get more and more details involved. After that, each major supporting activity is broken down into a list of activities that will be needed to accomplish it. And that's what level 4 is. So you start off with level 1, which is kind of a broad topic. You have your scope. Then it starts to get broken down into level 2, and then even more so in level 3. And then level 4 has even more detail involved in it. Another work breakdown structure that we can go over, we're going to go over, do an example, is the Gantt chart, which is used a lot in project management. So in this example, in level 1, what needs to be completed is yard work, and that's at 100%. That's what we want to have. Everything below level 1, all the different tasks and the major elements are going to assist us into getting 100% of the yard work completed. We have our major elements for the project. We have trimming, which we're going to have to get a percentage for. We have equipment preparation, which we're going to have to get a percentage for. We have pre and post cleanup, and we also have cutting the lawn. Again, these are a little out of order, but it's some tasks and some major elements that go into completing yard work. We have level 1 and we have level 2. Now we have to come up with some tasks or some supporting activities for each of the major elements involved with the yard work. All right, so after listing some of the level 3 supporting activities and putting some expected times to complete those activities, we find out what the total amount of time it takes to complete our yard work, which is 160 minutes, which is 100%. And then we can go through and figure out which task or which activities will take the most time to do. So out of all 4 of these activities, the one that's going to take the most is the pre and post cleanup. It's going to take us approximately 70 minutes or 44% of the yard work project. So we're going to use what's in this chart, the WBS example, and we're going to try to come up with a Gantt chart that kind of explains or kind of gives us a graphical look at the whole project of yard work as a whole. All right, so we're working on the Gantt chart, and what we want to do is put things in order based off of the yard work. So the first thing is equipment prep, which is 10 minutes. Second thing is cutting the lawn, which is 25 minutes. Third thing is cleanup. We had to break cleanup and post cleanup up, which is 10 minutes. Post cleanup, which I didn't put in. Post cleanup is 60 minutes. And then, post cleanup is the last thing. The fourth thing is trimming, which is 55 minutes. So after we get that, we can try to put this in our Gantt chart. All right, so this is kind of a nice looking Gantt chart. They all don't look like this. Sometimes you might have maybe You can have like the trimming, like actually going into like right where the pre-cleanup is. Um, they're not all as clean as this. You might have that, a task could be, overlapping. Again, task and overlap, but for this simple example, we just have them have each task starting right after the other one ends, which makes it easy for this example. Pert, which is short for Program Evaluation and Review Technique, and CPM, Critical Path Method, are two techniques used to manage large-scale projects. By using Pert or CPM, managers can obtain things like they get a graphical display of project activities. They can estimate how long the project will take, and how long any activity can be delayed without delaying the project. Although Pert and CPM were developed separately, they have a lot of things in common, which we'll see very shortly. One of the main features of Pert is their use of network diagrams to depict major project activities and their sequential relationships by using arrows and nodes. There are two slightly different conventions for constructing network diagrams. The first one is activity on arrow, which would be better if you see it. So you have your activity on arrow, which you'll see this is the activity right here, A, B, C, and it's on top of the arrow. And then you have your activity on node. Well, it's actually inside the node. Usually it's sitting like the A would be on top of the circle, the B would be on top of the circle, the C, because it's actually on. It's just two different ways of, differentiating, activities and nodes. The main determinant of the way PERT and CPM networks are analyzed and interpreted, uh, whether activity time estimates are probabilistic or deterministic. If actual time estimates are subject to variation, they are probabilistic. If actual time estimates are fairly certain, they are deterministic. We're going to do a example in Excel to kind of give you an idea of the differences between deterministic and probabilistic. So in this example, and for your homework and your quiz for next week, you'll be given a chart or a table that has activities, you have predecessors, and the expected time for each activity. We're expected to come up with some type of diagram or some type of picture that shows each path from start to finish. Once we come up with that diagram, then we could determine the length of the path by adding all of the expected times together in that path. We could also come up with the critical path, which is the path that takes the longest to finish. And then we can come up with the expected length of the project by adding the different, all of you add whatever the critical path is, that'll be the length of the project. And then you can find out the amount of slack time or time where, there's nothing going on or other things can be going on. So we can figure that out once we come up with our chart, our diagram using the activity, the predecessor, and the expected times. So we have 6 activities. So I'm gonna have all of my activity circles already created. So we've come up with our activity 1s. We have 2 activity 1s here. There's no immediate predecessor. And I need to put the number of weeks that it takes. So this is 8 weeks. And this is 4 weeks. All right, so now we move on to activity 2, which has 2 activities as well. All right, so for activity 2, again, we have 2 activities. Either you can remodel, which takes 11 weeks, or you can order the furniture, which takes 6 weeks. All right, so predecessor for 5 can be 2, 4, or 3. So we'll put 5 there. And the activity that we need to put on top of that is move in, which takes 1 week. And then the end of all of this is going to be activity 6, the end. So that's how it should look. So now that we have our path set up, I'll make this a little bit smaller so we can see everything. We can find out what the length of each path is. So path 1, we'll type it here, path 1 to 2 to 4 to 5 to 6 equals 8 weeks plus 6 weeks, that's 14, plus 3 weeks, that's 17, plus 1 week, that's 18. So that equals 18 weeks. That's the length of that path. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. So we have all of the paths. So that takes care of A. For the critical length, so the critical path is whichever path takes the longest. So based off of that, so path 1, 2, 5, and 6 is the critical path because that's 20 weeks. All right, and then the length of the expected length of the project is pretty much the critical path. So the length of the project is 20 weeks. And to come up with the slack time, we have to do a little bit more math for each path. We'll have path, the length, can't spell, and the slack time. So path 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, that equals 8 plus 6 plus 3 plus 6 plus 3 plus 1. That equals 18 weeks. And your slack time is pretty much whatever the critical path is minus the length of the path. So that'll give us 2 weeks. So we'll do the other 3 paths, and find out what the slack time is for the other 3 paths. All right, there's all our slack times. So that takes care of A, B, C, and D. Projects can present strategic opportunities and risk for organizations. So it's critical for the management in that organization to devote the necessary attention and resources to the projects. The projects are often used in situations that have some degree of uncertainty. So you don't know what's really going to happen. And that may cause delays, which may cause budgets to overrun, and which may lead to different failures to meet the technical requirements. To impact the project, management must ensure that careful planning of the project occurs. It's not uncommon for projects to fail. So all projects don't always end with a huge success. If and when failure does happen, it can be very beneficial to examine the reasons why those projects fail. So if they fail, even if they're successful, it's always good to kind of get an idea and examine some of the things that work and some of the things that don't work, so that once it happens, once a similar project comes up next time, you'll be able to use what you learned from the previous project. That's what managers and companies call lesson learned. So whenever you do a project, even if it's successful, you're always going to have some type of lessons learned, because you're not going to do everything exactly the way that it's expected to be done. So with that, I'll tell you what's going to be on your quiz, and then we'll be done for the class. So let me go to that section. All right, for the quiz, you will need to know for key terms: virtual project teams, activity on arrow, activity on node, crash, events, network diagram, Pert, deterministic, probabilistic, and slack. For the solved problems, you will need to know how to do a problem similar to problem one. So you're going to draw your diagram, your network diagram, using activity on arrow. You're going to find what the critical path is. You'll have to know how to calculate the slack time as well. It doesn't say it there, but know that you need to know how to calculate the slack time. And of course, you need to know, you have to determine the length of the project. So you'll have to know how to do those, or how to do that problem. So that's what's going to be on the quiz: the 10 terms and this one problem.